Hello and welcome to Exposed News Outlet. My name is Andrea and I will be your host. I have a lot to talk about today for the Director of National Intelligence and the alarming allegations from Russia, state television, and countless others as well. But before I do, if I could ask for you to please hit the subscribe button if you haven't already, and be sure to check the notification bell for all my latest updates and on my latest videos. Also, if you're able to, I do have a GoFundMe as things are really expensive and I still have quite a few items I need to get for like a new pro laptop for video editing and everything. And I need a video switcher, professional video switcher, professional cameras, all kinds of stuff. And it is really pricey, and I understand not everybody may be able to, but if you are, I'll have the link in the description box below. And thank you very much. So, without further ado, Tulsi Gabbard, a former U.S. representative from Hawaii and 2020 presidential candidate, has been a polarizing figure in American politics. She gained prominence for her vocal stance on foreign policy, particularly her opposition to regime change wars, and for her criticism of U.S. involvement in conflicts in the Middle East. However, in recent years, Gabbard has been the subject of serious allegations related to her foreign policy views and public statements, which have raised concerns about her alignment with Russian interests and her potential threat to the U.S. national security, allegations, and controversial views. One of the central aspects of the controversy surrounding Gabbard is her criticism of U.S. foreign policy, especially her opposition to military intervention in Syria and her vocal criticism of the U.S. government's stance towards Syrian president, or the late president, Bashar Al Assad. Gabbard has argued that U.S. should focus on diplomacy rather than military force in conflicts, and she has questioned the narratives surrounding the Syrian civil war, often dismissing allegations that Assad's government used chemical weapons against civilians. Her stance on Assad, particularly her meeting with the Syrian dictator in 2017, raised eyebrows among many U.S. lawmakers and foreign policy experts, especially as the Syrian regime has been accused of gross human rights violations and war crimes. Her rhetoric often mirrored that of Russian state media, which has consistently defended Assad and denied his regime's use of chemical weapons. This led some critics to accuse her of parroting Russian talking points, a charge that was further compounded when Russian state media outlets, including RT, Russia Today, and Sputnik, began to give Gabbard significant coverage, presenting her as a voice of reason on issues such as the Syrian conflict. These outlets, which are widely seen as tools of Russian disinformation, have praised Gabbard for her stance on various foreign policy issues, such as her opposition to NATO expansion and her criticism of U.S. involvement in Ukraine. As if these weren't controversial enough, there are other things you should know about her as well, including that she has had an anti-LGBTQ agenda, which she advocated for along with her father, that actually had a show about it in Hawaii, only for her to join the Democratic Party and walk back these views and say that she had changed. Fast forward to her leaving the party, and she reverted back to her anti-LGBTQ ways and ideas. Watch this clip.
In the absence of any normal vetting or background check process for Donald Trump's nominees to run the U.S. government, we are hoping that a Rachel Maddow Show public servant announcement can maybe fill in some of the gaps. So here are 6 things to know about Donald Trump's pick to be the Director of National Intelligence. She is former Hawaii Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard. Thing number 1. First thing to know about Tulsi Gabbard is that she started off life as an anti-homosexuality activist, which is a thing you can be in your life. Tulsi Gabbard was homeschooled her whole life, except for 2 years she reportedly spent in the Philippines attending a Hare Krishna school run by disciples of the self-proclaimed guru that she and her family follow, a group that has defectors who say it's an abusive authoritarian cult More on that in a moment. But while Tulsi Gabbard was being homeschooled in Hawaii, her dad was founding and leading a whole litany of anti-gay organizations in Hawaii. He even had an anti-gay radio show called Let's Talk Straight Hawaii. The whole point of the radio show, the whole point of every episode of the radio show was how terrible gay people are. Must have been an amazing show. Her father once flew from Hawaii all the way to North Carolina to lead a protest against there being a gay character on Dawson's Creek. He was very devoted to his cause. As part of her own anti-gay fervor, Tulsi Gabbard campaigned to ban gay people from getting married. She led a protest to ban gay people even from being allowed to have civil unions. She worked for an anti-gay organization that said gay people should be subjected to conversion therapy to cure them so they won't be gay anymore. Perhaps needless to say, but conversion therapy is neither therapy nor does it convert anyone. But that's thing number one to know about her. Thing number two. After years in which the only thing she was known for was her anti-homosexuality activism, when Tulsi Gabbard decided to get into politics more broadly, when she decided to run for Congress as a Democrat in blue state Hawaii, she started apologizing for her anti-gay past, saying she had changed and she didn't believe any of those anti-gay things anymore. Now that she has left Democratic Party politics, Tulsi Gabbard has reverted back to form. She introduced an anti-trans bill just before she left Congress in 2020. A couple years later, she enthusiastically endorsed Ron DeSantis's Don't Say Gay bill in Florida. By 2023, she was given a speech at CPAC about gay people being nefarious child molesters. So yeah, she's back to her roots. She changed, and she just changed right back. That's thing number two. Thing number three, about that supposed cult thing. Tulsi Gabbard's family moved to Hawaii in 1983 to join the disciples of this self-proclaimed guru in Hawaii. His name is Chris Butler. He had started an offshoot there of the Hare Krishna movement. Starting in the 1970s, Chris Butler's group made multiple efforts to get their members into politics, to get members of the group into elected office. Most of the time, those efforts failed after exposés in the local press that these candidates were all followers of the same mysterious Hare Krishna guru. But with Tulsi Gabbard, they finally made it. As the first one of his disciples really hit it big in politics, the guru, Chris Butler, told the New Yorker magazine that it was like a music teacher who, quote, taught one of his students cello, and oh, this student of mine is now playing cello in the Philharmonic Orchestra. He said, quote, and it's beautiful. That same New Yorker profile reports, quote, some former members portrayed themselves as survivors of an abusive cult. Quote, defectors tell stories of children discouraged by Butler from attending secular schools, of followers forbidden to speak publicly about the group, of returning travelers quarantined for days lest they transmit a contagious disease to Chris Butler, of devotees lying prostrate whenever he entered the room, or adding bits of his nail clippings to their food, or eating spoonfuls of sand that he had walked upon. For her part, Tulsi Gabbard says, it's not a cult, definitely not. That's thing number three. Thing number four. When Tulsi Gabbard ran for the Democratic nomination for President of the United States in the 2020 election, she literally moved to the state of New Hampshire ahead of the primary there. She rented a house in New Hampshire and moved in. She nevertheless only got 3% of the vote in New Hampshire. Tulsi Gabbard, perhaps it will not surprise you to hear this, proclaimed the 2020 presidential contest to be rigged against her, because otherwise, obviously, she'd be winning. She was endorsed for president by David Duke, the KKK leader, so, who knows, maybe we don't truly understand the depth of her support. Gabbard's bottom-of-the-barrel presidential campaign did take up a lot of her time, though, so much so that while she was campaigning, she missed 85% of the votes that happened in Congress. 85%. She so abandoned her congressional seat during that campaign that there were high-profile calls from Democrats in Hawaii that she should just make it official and resign her seat so her constituents could put somebody in there who was actually going to show up and do the job. Tulsi Gabbard did not resign. She did make it to work for one important vote-ish. She did make it to work for Donald Trump's first impeachment. And that was kind of a strange thing for her to go out of her way to appear in Washington for, because she ended up being the only member of the House who voted on the first Trump impeachment, but she refused to vote yes or no. She did show up for that vote, but she just voted present. That's thing number 4. Thing number 5. It's the Russia thing. You've probably heard something about this since Donald Trump announced that he wants to make her director of national intelligence. You might have seen quotes like this one emerging on Capitol Hill once Trump announced that he was picking her. Quote, "Behind closed doors, people think she might be compromised. Like, it's not hyperbole. There are members of our conference who think she is a Russian asset," said the Republican Senate aide. Tulsi Gabbard has insisted over and over again that she's definitely not a Russian asset. She has no idea why people keep saying that. That said, Russian state media has described her as a, quote, Russian agent. They've also described her as our, quote, girlfriend. Russian state media also lost their minds with happiness when Donald Trump named Tulsi Gabbard for the national intelligence job. Russian state TV put together a long, detailed, many-part sizzle reel of all the TV appearances in which she has repeated Kremlin talking points. In 2015, Tulsi Gabbard took a trip to Europe with the most pro-Russia member of Congress maybe ever, a man named Dana Rohrabacher. Rohrabacher brought Tulsi Gabbard with him overseas, and there she met with the Russian-supported military dictator of Egypt. Gabbard also famously has defended and met with the Russian-supported dictator of Syria when he used poison gas against his own people. She said it was probably a false flag attack carried out by the opposition just to make him look bad. She later had to pay back the money she spent to go meet the dictator when it emerged that a political party that supports him had paid for her trip. She praised Vladimir Putin for sending in the Russian military to prop up that Syrian dictator in that country's civil war. She's also praised Russia for sending its military to invade Ukraine. She has repeated fake Kremlin talking points, blaming NATO for that invasion, saying there were U.S. biolabs in Ukraine and Ukraine's a bunch of Nazis, and all the rest of those Kremlin talking points. Her foreign travel and foreign contacts have been eyebrow-raising enough within the U.S. government that earlier this year she was put on a TSA watch list called Quiet Skies, which is something that subjects you to extra screening by air marshals when you fly. She got put on that watch list, and then Donald Trump nominated her to be Director of National Intelligence. So that's thing number 5. And finally, thing number 6. So the law that created this job, the Director of National Intelligence job, that statute says that any person who's appointed to that job, quote, shall have extensive national security experience. Shall have. That's like a requirement for the job. The first person appointed Director of National Intelligence was a 5-time U.S. ambassador. Every subsequent Director of National Intelligence confirmed by the Senate has been an ambassador or a flag-rank military officer with significant experience in intelligence. They've all sort of met the criteria. Tulsi Gabbard, on the other hand, she has been a congresswoman and a famous conspiracy theorist, and she's been a mid-level officer in the National Guard. And that's it. She has no experience running any large organization of any kind or even holding a senior level job in any large organization of any kind. I mean, we don't know if she had some sort of high rank in the Hare Krishna group. I don't know if they have ranks other than the guru guy at the top where, you know, eating the toenail clippings and eating spoonfuls of sand that he's trod upon. I mean, that makes him kind of senior. I don't know if there are other senior gigs in that or if she has one. That said, Tulsi Gabbard has started a lot of PACs, political action committees, way more than your average member of Congress. She has a whole bunch of them. And as fundraising vehicles, they've apparently been very effective. She's raised a lot of money, but it's murky where all the money has been going. The vast majority of it appears to have not gone to political campaigns, which is what PACs are supposedly for. That said, all her various PACs and indeed a charity she recently started, they are all being managed by real financial professionals. All of her PACs, for example, share the same treasurer. It's the same treasurer who worked for George Santos. George Santos, who was expelled from Congress and is currently awaiting sentencing after being convicted on multiple wire fraud and identity theft charges. So at least you know you're in good hands. That's reassuring. And that's 6 things to know about your potential new Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard. This has been a Rachel Maddow Show public servant.
Thing you are not going to hear on the mainstream media. What you do hear is warmongers arguing that we must protect Ukraine because it is a quote-unquote democracy. But they're lying. Ukraine isn't actually a democracy. For example, to hold on to power, Ukraine's president shut down the 3 TV stations that were openly criticizing him and his policies, imprisoned the head of the opposition political party that had come in second place in their elections, and went and arrested and jailed that party's leaders. This is exactly what Putin has been accused of doing. But Ukraine did this all with the support of the United States.
Russian disinformation. As Gabbard's public profile grew, her critics, including some prominent members of her own party, accused her of promoting narratives that were aligned with Russian disinformation campaigns. These campaigns have long been aimed at undermining the U.S. government, sowing division with the American public, and weakening Western alliances. For instance, her repeated criticisms of U.S. support for Ukraine's sovereignty and her questioning the legitimacy of NATO's expansion aligned closely with Russia's geopolitical objectives, particularly in the context of the Kremlin's efforts to maintain influence over its neighboring countries. The accusations against Gabbard were amplified during the 2020 presidential election, when the U.S. intelligence agencies warned that Russia was actively working to interfere in American elections and amplify diverse rhetoric. Gabbard's tendency to make statements that aligned with Russian interests, including minimizing Russian interference in U.S. politics, reinforced suspicions that she was inadvertently or intentionally helping to advance Russian goals. Her defenders have argued that she is simply advocating for a non-interventionist foreign policy, but her critics contend that her views echo the Kremlin's messaging, raising concerns about her independence and motivations. The accusations became more pointed when Gabbard was mentioned by Hillary Clinton in 2019 as being groomed by Russia. Clinton suggested that Gabbard was being used by Moscow to undermine U.S. democracy, a comment that Gabbard dismissed as a smear. However, Clinton's remark fueled further speculation about Gabbard's ties to Russian interests and her role in shaping the discourse on key foreign policy issues. The term Putins Girlfriend has been used pejoratively by some of Gabbard's critics to describe her perceived alignment with Russian interests. While this label is hyperbolic and an obvious exaggeration, it highlights the deep mistrust that Gabbard's views have generated among those concerned about Russia's long-term strategy to weaken the West. Her repeated criticisms of the U.S. foreign policy, her controversial interactions with Russian officials, and her sympathetic rhetoric towards figures like Assad and Vladimir Putin have earned her reputation as a proponent of policies that align with Russian geopolitical objectives. Although Gabbard has denied any formal ties with Russian government or its agents, the continued embrace of her views by Russian state media, coupled with her insistence on questioning mainstream narratives regarding Russian aggression, such as the annexation of Crimea or the poisoning of political opponents, has led to accusations that she is at the very least, unwittingly serving as a mouthpiece for Kremlin propaganda. Given the allegations surrounding Gabbard's foreign policy views, her public statements, many security experts and political observers have raised concerns about the potential risks she poses to U.S. national security. These concerns are particularly acute when considering her to access sensitive or classified information. The following reasons highlight why figures like Gabbard should not be granted such access. Number one, potential for compromise. Individuals with foreign ties or allegiances that are seen as conflicting with U.S. interests pose a risk to national security. If Gabbard's views are shaped even indirectly by Russian influence or aligned with Russian foreign policy goals, she could be vulnerable to manipulation. This is especially concerning if she were privy to sensitive or classified information that could be used to further the Russian government's interests. Number two, advancing divisive narratives. Gabbard's outspoken criticism of U.S. foreign policy has often aligned with the interests of adversarial states. If granted access to classified information, she could intentionally or inadvertently leak or spread narratives that undermine U.S. national security or create divisions within the government or public. Her tendency to promote controversial or counter-narrative perspectives, especially regarding Russia, makes her a liability in this context. Number three is risk of undermining Western alliances. By promoting ideas that mirror Russian propaganda, Gabbard risks undermining the United States' relationships with its allies, especially in Europe and NATO. For example, her skepticism towards NATO and her criticism of the U.S. interventions in the Middle East could weaken the solidarity of the Western alliances, which are critical in countering global threats posed by Russia and other authoritarian regimes. Number four is undermining intelligence community credibility. The U.S. intelligence community relies on individuals who are loyal to American democratic values and national interests. Gabbard's alignment with certain Russian narratives could erode trust within the intelligence community, making it harder to maintain the integrity of intelligence gathering operations. Her public questioning of the United States intelligence assessments regarding Russian interference in the U.S. elections, for example, undermines confidence in the agencies that are tasked with protecting national security. Check out this clip from Deadline White House with Nicole Wallace.
I just think we have to do a really thorough job of vetting Tulsi Gabbard and asking some very difficult questions. Obviously, we have all watched her toe the line of some brutal despotic regimes, defending Moscow's invasion of Ukraine, engaging in secret diplomacy with Bashar Al Assad in the middle of his murderous rampage inside Syria. I just think we have to ask some real questions about Tulsi Gabbard's positions.
Hi again, everybody. 5 o'clock in New York. At a time when global tensions are high and the war in Ukraine is intensifying, Donald Trump's decision to tap Tulsi Gabbard as his incoming director of national intelligence is raising alarms, as you heard there. New reporting uncovers how she has become a favorite among the state media of one of America's adversaries, Russia. That's according to the New York Times, which reports this, quote, "In Russia, the reaction to her potential appointment has been gleeful, even if Putin's government remains wary of American policies, even under a second Trump administration." Quote, "The CIA and the FBI are trembling," a Russian newspaper wrote on Friday in a glowing profile of Ms. Gabbard, noting positively that Ukrainians consider her, quote, "an agent of the Russian state." A state television channel called her a Russian comrade in Mr. Trump's emerging cabinet. The Times goes on to report, quote, "Among members from both parties, her tacit support of Russia's war aims in Ukraine and her repetition of Kremlin disinformation have raised doubts about whether she should be given oversight of the intelligence agencies, including the responsibility of preparing the highly classified daily intelligence briefings for the returning president, which we have just learned Trump is now receiving as the president-elect after having chosen not to receive them while he was a candidate." Trump receiving intelligence briefings is remarkable for the fact that just last year he was criminally charged for mishandling national defense information and classified information. His already established disregard for the safety of our nation's secrets makes his cabinet choices, especially those with access to top intelligence, all the more serious. Here's Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger.
So I'm a former CIA officer. I worked undercover for my time with the agency as a case officer. The reason that this nomination, I think, is so dangerous is because any damage that she would do, any information she would provide the president, right? She tweets Russian propaganda. Why not include it in the presidential daily brief? She traffics in conspiracy theories. Why not kind of push that into the greater ecosystem of intelligence? And none of that would ever be seen by the public. There's no opportunity to push back. There's no opportunity to understand. It's not about party or the president-elect. It's about our national security.
That is where we start the hour with some of our favorite experts and friends. Former CIA director and MSNBC senior national security analyst John Brennan's here. Also joining us, former assistant director for counterintelligence at the FBI, MSNBC national security analyst Frank Figliuzzi is back. And the president of Media Matters, Angelo Carusone, is here. Director Brennan, let me just bring into the conversation before we start some new reporting in the Washington Post about the transition, which is what's happening right now. The Washington Post today reports this, quote, Trump has yet to collaborate with the General Services Administration, which is tasked with the complex work of handing over control of hundreds of agencies because he has not turned in required pledges to follow ethics rules. His transition teams have yet to set foot inside a single federal office. In calls with foreign heads of state, Trump has cut out the State Department, its secure lines, and its official interpreters. So Trump is right now, what, a black box to the intelligence agencies he's about to oversee?
Well, I think Donald Trump is a well-known commodity in terms of what he did during his first term and also how he recklessly handled classified information, which I think is one of the reasons why there is such concern within the intelligence communities. But, I mean, let's face it, Donald Trump is not going to follow any rules but his own. That's why there have been no individuals that have been submitted for background checks to the FBI. These ethics pledges have not been signed. As you point out, GSA has not been able to engage with them in order to ensure this transition is smooth and seamless. But then also with his appointees, I think he's just showing that he is going to do whatever he wants, and he's basically daring Republicans, especially in the Senate, to defy him. So given that the Director of National Intelligence is by law the president's principal intelligence advisor, the individual who oversees the production of the President's Daily Brief, which contains the secrets and sensitive classified information of the U.S. intelligence community, this is a tremendous responsibility that is now being entrusted, at least in the nomination of Tulsi Gabbard. And it's clear, based on what Senator Murphy said at New York Times and Congresswoman Spanberger, she has done things and said things over the years that really cause great concern about where her sympathies and sentiments lie. But also, she has no experience or background in the intelligence profession. I mean, yes, she served in the U.S. military for 20 years. She should be thanked for that. But she has none of the experience or the credentials that are necessary to lead 18 intelligence agencies departments when we're facing so many challenges around the globe. And so, therefore, again, Donald Trump is just going to, I think, ramrod these selections through. And it's really going to be up to the Republicans in the Senate to be able to stop him.
Director Brennan, can you just say a little bit about what happens on day one for the workforce of, say, the CIA?
Well, they on noon on January 20th, when Donald Trump is inaugurated, they then will going to be following the direction of whoever is in charge of the agency. And so John Ratcliffe has been nominated, but he's not, I don't know if he's going to be confirmed soon after that. But Donald Trump has the ability to appoint a acting director. The deputy director of the CIA is not a Senate-confirmed position. So that acting director can actually carry out all those duties and responsibilities. And so that person can send, I think, some shocking directions to the CIA officers who, again, put their lives on the line around the globe 24/7. And so I think that there's, great worry and concern about what does this mean, given that Donald Trump has said he's basically going to blow up the administrative state and do some slashing and burning. And these are the institutions that we rely on so heavily for our national security. And what I don't want my former colleagues to do is to leave the agency, because we need them to stay strong and to carry out their responsibilities with the solemnity that they have over the course of, I think, the CIA's history.
Frank, let me read a little bit more of NBC's reporting on how this would work. Gabbard would pose a potentially unprecedented dilemma for U.S. intelligence agencies, a top official who may not share an underlying premise about which countries are America's major enemies. The DNI's job is to define the world as it is, as opposed to advocating for a world as you want it to be. That's a former intelligence official. Former U.S. intelligence officials and lawmakers also worry that Gabbard and the new Trump administration might decide to scale back intelligence sharing with Ukraine, possibly in an attempt to force Kyiv to agree to a peace deal. Your thoughts?
Yeah, indeed. The job of a DNI is to coordinate the intelligence community, everybody rowing in the direction of finding the facts that best support U.S. interests. And if the person in charge of that is biased and wants everybody rowing over here away from fact and truth and U.S. interests, she has the ability to do that. She sets the shopping list, so to speak, for collection across the U.S. intelligence community. And as John has just said, she'll also decide what goes in that daily brief to the president. And if the president doesn't want to hear anything about Russia, then guess what? She's going to say, I don't want that in the briefing. He's not going to hear that. That's bad news for him. That's not what U.S. intelligence collection is supposed to be. And I know a lot of people are talking about the threat and risk she poses because of her positions, her travels, and all of that. But it's even worse than that. We can't stand here and say with any certainty that she is a Russian asset or she poses a threat or risk, because we're not being allowed to view or engage in the standard FBI background investigation that is supposed to happen with this level of nominees. So that means the Senate is flying blind and may even lose their advice and consent powers, which are in the Constitution, if Trump goes the route of recess appointments. That means the Senate Judiciary Committee is not getting what they're supposed to have. And it means that the American public doesn't know who's taking one of the most important positions in the intelligence community. No background investigation, no GSA process. What does that mean? Is Trump afraid that GSA office space would be bugged? Is that where we are right now? Or he doesn't simply want to have to sign that ethics agreement? That's where we are. We don't even know who these people are because we're deprived of the background investigations. And who gives these people a clearance, by the way? DNI's got every clearance known to man, right? Who says, yeah, you get the clearance despite the lack of any background investigation?
Tulsi Gabbard's foreign policy views, which have often aligned with Russian interests, have raised serious concerns about her loyalty to the U.S. national security and her ability to handle sensitive information. While her rhetoric may stem from a belief in non-interventionism rather than overt malice, her actions and statement have nonetheless raised alarm bells among those who see her as a liability in the context of protecting U.S. national interests. Given the growing risks associated with Russian disinformation and influence operations, it is critical for the United States to carefully consider the potential implications of granting individuals like Gabbard access to classified information and to ensure that national security is not compromised by figures whose views may inadvertently or intentionally serve the interests of adversarial foreign powers. Thank you for watching my video. Hopefully you learned facts that you didn't already know. Be sure to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Drop your comments below. Let me know what you think about these unqualified sycophants Trump keeps trying to elect into these positions of power. It's very alarming.
pick for Director of National Intelligence is facing criticism from prominent Republicans. Former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley says she has major issues with Tulsi Gabbard's candidacy. Haley's highlighting Gabbard's past comments that run counter to U.S. intelligence, including blaming NATO for the invasion of Ukraine and her decision to meet with Syrian dictator Bashar Al Assad in 2017.
So now she's defended Russia, she's defended Syria, she's defended Iran, and she's defended China. No, she has not denounced any of these views. None of them. She hasn't taken one of them back. DNI, Department of National Intelligence, this is not a place for a Russian, Iranian, Syrian, Chinese sympathizer. DNI has to analyze real threats. Are we comfortable with someone like that at the top of our national intelligence agencies?
Meanwhile, Trump's former national security advisor John Bolton says Gabbard's judgment is non-existent, saying her nomination should give our adversaries in Moscow and Beijing a lot of relief. Let's bring in State Department reporter Shannon Kingston, along with ABC News contributor and former senior CIA field operative Daryl Blocker for more. Shannon, where does Gabbard stand on foreign policy issues, and why are her past comments drawing so much scrutiny?
Well, Diane, Gabbard says she's under attack now because she's a pacifist, but her critics on both sides of the aisle, they say there's a big difference between pushing for peace and with being a Putin sympathizer. Now, as you mentioned multiple times, she has slammed the Biden administration for calling the war in Ukraine Putin's war, claiming it was actually NATO and the U.S. that pushed Putin to invade the country. She's also spread misinformation from Russia, the very same kind of conspiracy theories that the U.S. intelligence community works to highlight and disband and discredit. So really, this is something that has been a target on Tulsi's back for some time. And it's not just the Kremlin that's drawn some controversy here. She also met with Syrian authoritarian leader and war criminal Bashar Al Assad in 2017, the height of that country's civil war.
Daryl, having worked in the intelligence community, what's your reaction to Gabbard's nomination?
Initially, Diane, I was just probably as concerned as everybody else, but then I started to look into her other past. She has served on the Armed Services Committee, on the Foreign Affairs Committee in the House, and on the Homeland Security. She's a former combat medic. She's got a lot of exposure on the military side, and no, she does not quite stack up in terms of credentials with any of the 9 past DNIs, but her role is as a clearinghouse, so to speak, and she doesn't have any real operational control over any of the other 17 members of the IC or any fiscal control over them as well. So she will be limited in what she can actually execute.
Yeah, and Daryl, I want to talk a little bit more about that, because how much power would Gabbard have as Director of National Intelligence, and what role do you think she could play in dealing with American adversaries?
Our American adversaries, whether it's the Bashar Assad from 2017 or some of the Putin comments, as an intelligence officer, as an operations officer, we have to deal with some of the more, shall we say, questionable characters in the world. So that really doesn't concern me. Her doing it outside of connecting with and collaborating with the intelligence community writ large is a problem. But her power is going to be limited. Her power is going to be limited in terms of the relationships that she has with the USDI, the top military intel guy at DIA, at CIA, at NSA. And again, she's very strong on the military side in terms of her past experiences, and half of the intel community is Department of Defense. So perhaps she's got some allies in there that could help her, but she cannot do it without full collaboration of the other agency heads.
Also, if you can like my video and share it on your social media platforms, I would appreciate it a lot. Thank you. And as always, have a blessed day and be kind to yourself and be kind to others as well. Thank you.